Howdy folks, this is CowTipper Vern again. Leaving an extreme, high-control religious group involves deconstructing how you view many topics. It involves reassessing them, redefining them in a healthier way, and then reclaiming them. Today I'm going to talk about information. In this Redefinition series, I've talked about how I realized as I was leaving the 2x2s that I needed to reclaim my emotions, reclaim the idea that I have emotions and that they're not all bad, that some of them are good, some of them are useful, that they matter, and that my reactions to things aren't necessarily wrong just because they're mine. After that, I learned that thinking for myself was okay. It wasn't inherently evil and wrong. Once I'd worked through those two concepts, now that I'm thinking for myself and being okay with the feelings that come along with that, it made me want to learn some things. I think everybody goes through the process as they leave of realizing they don't have a lot of information. They need to learn things. And the scary thing to notice is that a lot of what you've learned has been curated, and a lot of the information has been either hidden or just ignored, or even worse, you've been turned against your own thoughts and emotion to the point that you don't look for your own information and you don't learn on your own. You feel that learning itself is wrong. 2x2 culture tells you that. 2x2 culture is extremely fearful. In the 2x2 culture, there's a general ambient distrust of information and a distrust of learning. We're always warned to not be worldly, and the only thing that's not worldly is us. So all the good information has to come from us. It comes from the workers who we trust the most, and it comes from those around us, our elders, our parents, whoever. In any convention or gospel meeting series you go to, you will hear teachings against worldly wisdom. There's constant warnings to be careful about what you're feeding on. You might get confused. You might be hurt by what you learn. The world lies to you. The world lies about everything, from history to the CSA scandal that's going on right now. Every single thing you learn about is reframed as whether or not it conforms to 2x2 beliefs, doctrine, and culture. And conversation is constantly filled with equivocation to make sure that that point gets driven home all the time. And that at the end of the day, you just look inward and never outward. It's not that they're fearful of learning overall. They're fearful of learning from the wrong sources because sources matter. They're fearful of impure information. They want to be right, capital R. They want to be right before God. So the idea of learning the wrong information and having it take you away from meetings is the scariest thing. The problem is the 2x2s don't have a lot of their own information. So the idea turns into, don't trust experts. Don't trust the world. Don't trust people who think they know. Don't trust science, a lot of times. Don't trust people who the world thinks they should trust. It creates a distrust just for the sake of distrust, and a trust in meetings and workers just for the sake of trust. Not that you can pick and choose and learn the differences for yourself. You just don't trust the experts. And that's why you have a lot of 2x2 people, in my opinion, who make a lot of very strange choices. 2x2s have a very strange relationship with information, facts, and things like that. Education itself doesn't count as education unless it comes from the right sources. A theme that runs through all of my podcasts here is it has nothing to do with what's done, it has to do with who's doing it. It doesn't matter what you do, what matters is who you are. If you're a professing person, you can be educated and learn science and things, but what's most important is the Bible. If you're not a professing person, it doesn't matter what you know and what you've learned. It didn't come from God, i.e. the workers, so it doesn't matter. I actually grew up with this dichotomy in my head and sort of survived with it that way, and I'm not sure how I did it, but it seemed fine for me. I actually have a degree in a science discipline, and I was able to compartmentalize a lot of things. But it bothered me the older I got that the anti-education, anti-science sentiment was so prevalent among 2x2s. And the older I got and the more things happened in the world that bothered me, the conspiracy theory parts really bothered me as well. I might make a few enemies saying the next thing, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's important to me. In the 2x2s, there are a lot of conspiracy theorists. There are a lot of people who don't believe in any sort of scientific thing, not because they can't see it and observe it, or even measure it themselves in some cases. They just don't trust science. They don't trust the idea of it. They don't trust the idea that the answers don't come from the Bible. I realized after a while that 2x2s would rather ignore good, solid information because it came from the wrong person, and then pay that price themselves rather than listen to worldly education. Ultimately, that's what caused me to leave, if I had to distill it down into one point. But it's more complicated than that, obviously. But the realization I had one day that not only did 2x2 culture not give good outcomes, it eschewed good outcomes if the outcomes weren't coming from the right source. That was an alarming realization to me. After a while, you realize that because something is trusted by the world, therefore you cannot trust it. You realize it doesn't have anything to do with the information itself at all. History doesn't matter, science doesn't matter, none of that stuff matters, so long as it comes from a source that isn't godly, quote unquote, or of God, something like that. That plays into all of the other parts of this podcast today, that if the right source says the right thing, you'll believe it, and it actually becomes part of your doctrine in a way, your own personal doctrine, your own personal set of beliefs, entirely because it's counter to the world. I think this is a nonsense way to live, and I'm really glad I don't have to do that anymore. I can try information based on if people know what they're talking about, what makes sense, and more importantly, what I observe myself. 2x2 culture will tell you to look at something, and if it doesn't match your beliefs already, then it's wrong. A very normal, regular explanation for something isn't good if it came from a worldly expert. A detached, made-up, fantastical explanation works just fine as long as it came from somebody inside, as long as it came from a trusted source. And by trusted source, of course, I mean the workers, the elders, somebody you trust that's professing. That's a very confused way to interact with the world. And I'm very, very glad that I don't have to equivocate and pretend that that makes any sense. I don't need that in my life at all. Another good reason to leave. The sneaky thing about learning to trust somebody based on who they are rather than what they're saying or any of their credibility is that it gives authority of your life over to somebody who's never had to earn it. Whoever has the right verbiage behind their name, whoever has the right title, whoever has the right reputation, becomes the one who gets to tell you what to do. And that's how you get situations where people who've never had spouses can tell you about marital situations. That's where you get people who've never been married telling you exactly how to treat your spouse and what to do when there is trouble. Or people who've never had kids telling you that they're the experts in how to raise your kids based on a few Bible verses with vague interpretations based on the vibes of the worker themselves. That seems unhealthy and frankly pretty risky. The first most obvious way that 2x2s control information and manipulate it is in talking about their own history. 2x2s, of course, don't believe they have a documented history. They believe their history goes all the way back to the shores of Galilee because Jesus was standing by a lake and told everybody what to do and everybody did it. And the story kind of goes that it went underground for a really long time. And something, now we have workers. Of course, in reality, it was William Irvine who split off from the faith mission to start his own gig. And that is documented absolutely everywhere. And you should go look it up. There's an excellent book I keep talking about called Preserving the Truth by Cherie Kropp-Ehrig. I think everybody should have a copy of it, especially if you're in meetings, especially if you're still professing. I have a copy. I've bought copies for people. And by the way, I have no vested interest in whether you read it or not. This isn't a plug. I don't know the author personally, although we've messaged online. But I think the book is really well done and really well documented, really well sourced. The documentation is excellent. Growing up, we were told constantly that the history was not true. When I was young, there was a book called The Secret Sect that had been published by a couple, and it went around to my area growing up, and everyone got really upset about it, and some people even burned copies of it. I like to point out that if you're the one burning the copies of the books, you're not on the good side of whatever discussion you're having. 2x2s, especially workers, like to deny that William Irvine was the first worker because it sounds like a cult leader. Make of that what you will. They don't like to talk about him because it means that there's a person at the beginning of all this. Most religious organizations like to point to the leader or the founder or something like that. Many religious organizations like to just say, hey, we have a founder, but we've moved on. And I think that actually makes sense. It would make a lot of sense for the 2x2s to do that as well, but they can't do that because, again, the underpinning of their entire organization is that it came straight from Jesus, directly from Jesus, through the workers, uninterrupted to you. They like that narrative because there is a lot of credibility in saying you came directly uninterrupted from Jesus. Now, even that doctrine doesn't go back as far as William Irvine. It came along a little bit later. The living witness doctrine doesn't even predate William Irvine. It was a theological concept that showed up in a book, and some workers read it and liked it and used it, and they use it to this day, and you can read all about it in Preserving the Truth. I think the workers are afraid that they'll lose credibility if they take on any sort of story or history, so they just stamp it out in real time. The goalposts are moving quite a bit in this regard, though. Over the last 2 years especially, and especially since Brewergate, as we'll call it, I've heard many workers talking about themselves in a historical context that goes back a little over 100 years. Even one of the highest up overseers recently mentioned in a letter something about workers getting a revelation in the 19th century. I think that will just make people more mad at this point. A lot of people left meetings because they found out about the history and asked their workers about it, and it was either denied outright or it was acknowledged, and then the person was told to not talk about it. Those people often leave because it's just such an insulting thing to say. Yes, we have a history. Yes, it contradicts what we're saying from the platform currently, but don't tell anybody about it. 2x2s often talk about how the way actually does predate William Irvine. I had an elder once tell me, oh yeah, there's convention notes from before William Irvine was around. A lot of people say that, and I've never actually seen any. No one can actually name them. No one knows where they came from. No one knows who wrote them down. But everyone seems to know they exist. It's kind of like my moniker as a CowTipper. Everybody has a friend who in college went around and tipped cows, but no one's ever actually done it themselves. There's a mythical quality to it that people really enjoy, and it makes a good story. And in the case of the 2x2s, the vague history gives them a lot of credibility in their minds. But then again, a lot of people leave because of the exact same thing. I'm always impressed by the fact that people don't seem to mind the rules changing on them. Even in the one true way where the rules are from the very beginning of Earth and we go back to shores of Galilee and all that. The rules change all the time. Doctrines have changed, the hymn book has changed. Many things have changed, and there's all kinds of inconsistencies. The most interesting one in my mind being the East Coast and West Coast of the United States not agreeing on whether divorce and remarriage is okay and under what conditions. And then you have different countries doing different things. Some countries allow you to celebrate Christmas, but will break the antennas off your car so you don't listen to the radio. Other countries don't care about the radio. They'll let you listen to it, but you can't celebrate Christmas. None of it makes any sense, and it's not consistent, but they tell you up front what the expectations are. You know, if you're in a place where you're not supposed to listen to the radio in the car, the workers might come snap your antenna off. It's happened to a lot of people. A lot of churches do stuff like this. A lot of churches have inconsistencies or changing doctrines, changing ideas. Some of them call it things like new revelation or new light or whatever. 2x2s don't really do that. They're not quite as open about it, but things shift over time and people just sort of deal with it. They'll just consider it changing priorities or whatever. But that's a completely different thing than lying about your history. That bothers people a lot, especially now that we know that people know this. A lot of workers know about the history, and many of them have said so. I've read emails and letters where workers have talked about how there was some special revelation given to some people not that long ago, 120 years ago or whatever. Slowly adopting what everybody knows is true over time might work, but what hasn't worked up until now is telling people that that wasn't the case, basically just lying about it. Telling them, yeah, we know, but let's not talk about it. Or, no, what you're reading online is bad, don't go online, don't read anything online. Control, control, control. You're bad if you go online. If you go online, that's sinful, the devil will get you, the world is out to get us, the world's out to get you, everybody's against us, all this false information on the internet. And it'll be false information until pretty soon it'll be adopted as truth. But until then, as long as they keep calling it false information, people are going to leave over it. And in my opinion, they should. People don't like being lied to. People can deal with all kinds of changes and expectations, but as soon as they realize somebody's lying, they check out. And that makes sense. And that includes lies of omission. Just not being told the whole truth because you're not trusted with it is very condescending. If people don't give you the whole story because they just don't trust you with it, or give you some of it and tell you not to ask anymore, or tell you not to ask, or tell you that you have a bad spirit if you ask, that's a lie of omission, and people don't like that. And I know people have left over things like this. When the Secrets Act came out, a lot of people asked very honest questions with no intention of leaving, not in an accusatory thing. They were asking for information. They weren't trying to throw accusations around. They just wanted some good info. They wanted to know the truth. After all, they are the truth, right? Capital T. And when some workers lied about it, or some workers told them not to ask, and then other workers even said, yeah, it's true, but let's not talk about it, a lot of people left over that. And a lot of people are going to leave now that there's even better books about it. People don't like their information controlled. It feels dishonest. Despite the obvious, understandable point that people don't like being lied to and they don't like having their information controlled, workers keep trying to do it. There's been a scandal going on now for multiple years, and workers' responses to questions about it, or questions about anything, continue to include lines like, please don't forward this. Please don't send this to anybody. I don't want to see this on the internet, etc., etc. I'll never understand that level of secrecy. I'll never understand why the one true way that has to be delivered via the mouths of a worker, the living witness doctrine, how much information is controlled coming from those workers. The belief system centers around the idea that workers need to deliver the gospel to everybody. And then we're told to tear up lists of where the workers are. We're told not to talk about them. We're told not to even refer to them in some cases. We can't ask questions. We just listen, and then we do. That's it. Obedience. Obey, obey, obey. We're told not to question. We actually have a hymn that says something about not questioning. We might have multiple. We sing about it in meeting. We sing about not questioning. It's very strange. I think it might help if they had their own information, if they had their own doctrines, faith statements, things like that. If they wrote something down somewhere, but they don't want to do that because they want it to look like it all comes from the Bible. And I guess I get that. I understand it from a doctrinal standpoint, but the problem arises when any question that can't be directly addressed by the Bible comes up. You can only do two things. You can say, we need to force a view from the Bible onto this situation, or we just blame the person for bringing it up. Say they have a bad spirit, kick them to the curb, something like that. There's a lot of people have left meetings after they've had genuine, thoughtful questions and real concerns about their soul, about life, about their experience here on earth. And the workers have basically ignored them because they don't have any good info. They have the Bible, and the Bible's obviously not cutting it. So the only thing they can do when the information they have isn't good enough, they can condemn any contrary information, or they can condemn the person. One of those two things always happens. If somebody brings other information to the workers and says, hey, what about this? Whether it be about history, whether it be about doctrine, whether it be about just things that are happening, one of those two things happens. The workers either condemn the information itself as evil and brought by the devil and the world's out to get us, which they always think the world's out to get them, or they condemn the person doing it. You are limited to very, very little information. And I think they think that means you're led by the Spirit or something. That's probably what they would say. They would probably say, we don't need a lot of writings. We're led by the Spirit and we read the Bible. I think they could get away with that as long as nobody compares notes and realizes that no two workers believe the same thing, really. And definitely no two areas under different overseers think the same thing. That's the type of thing you realize when you can go online or you travel around or something like that, and you can start comparing notes to different areas. You realize that not everybody has the same info. You realize really quickly that some people have just learned different things. It can be kind of confusing. The standards are different everywhere because nobody writes anything down. I know I've said that a lot, but it matters a lot. In some ways, not writing anything down is what's kept people together for a very long time. But in an age where information can be shared, not writing any information down means the only information out there is not by the 2x2s. It's by people who've left. And that doesn't make them look very good. Workers constantly ask members of the 2x2s to not share information of any kind, really. In the few cases where they write letters, it's really common for them to end the letter with, please don't share this. Don't post this online, stuff like that. The implication, of course, being that sharing it would damage them in some way. It's God's true, only one living way. But if anybody finds out about it, it's going to ruin it. And it turns out they're not wrong. Last year, a letter got out, and it completely changed the history of the 2x2s. I happen to know because I had a front row seat for it. I'm sure many people have heard of Brewergate. There was a worker named Dean Brewer, and he passed away, and quite a while later, people found out that he'd lived a double life. People brought forth accusations against him. And the overseer of the area that he had formerly overseen himself wrote a letter to people in the area. The letter explained what happened and explained some disappointment in Dean and said that there was evidence that he'd lived this double life and maybe possibly had done illegal things as well. It was somewhat vague about what he'd actually done, vague to the point that since reading this letter, I've heard many people add in details that weren't there. But regardless, the overseer felt it was the right thing to do to tell some people within the church, not everybody, a few select people. The overseer gave the letter out to some workers and asked them to just read it to people or show it to them so they could read it. One of the homes the letter was taken to, physically, was a very brave elder and wife, and they were told to read the letter and then give it back. From what I've heard, this is pretty common with this letter. I don't know if all letters are like this. I know when I was younger, I remember having elders read letters in meeting and then put them away and not hand out copies. I don't know if they were instructed to do that specifically. Of course, I wonder now. But in this case, that was the instructions. They were not supposed to share the letter. They were supposed to read it and hand it back. The elder's wife took it and instead took a picture with her phone. And so she had a copy of the letter. Then she transcribed it. She knew this letter was a big deal. She knew that if Dean had abused some people, there might be others who could use that information. And she was right. She passed a copy to someone who was in our group, our X2x2 support group online. That person asked us if we wanted a copy of it, and of course we said yes, of course. So they sent it to us, and so we had a transcribed version of a letter that an overseer had told elders not to share minimally, to read to the people in their meeting, but be vague about it. That was one of the instructions. Just be vague about it. Don't say much. Just say that, I don't know, Dean had some problems, I guess. There were some allegations against Dean. Be vague, don't get into it, and definitely don't show them the letter. Well, now we had the letter. The X2x2 support group had a copy of the letter. We were so shocked by the letter that we actually waited to corroborate it for about 24 hours because it just seemed so crazy. And of course, publishing something like that online, if it wasn't really the letter, would be a problem. But it wasn't. We were able to corroborate it, and I'm not going to say how we did that. But there were copies around. People had some, and rumors started to spread. So we posted it on Facebook. We posted it in our group, and the admins of the group, Kari and Abby, posted it publicly on their public Facebook pages. What happened next is really fascinating to me because the letter, of course, spread like wildfire. It spread everywhere. It spread fast. And there's a lot of misinformation about what happened after that. To this day, besides the obvious misinformation of people thinking the letter said things it didn't really say and running with those accusations, people also think the workers shared it. They didn't. The workers were told not to share it. They were told to verbally just tell elders about it, a few people, a few select people, and then to be vague from then on out. They didn't know a copy would get out. I'm sure they would assume at some point it would. I've since heard people say that the workers weren't trying to hide the information. They weren't trying to be sneaky about it. They weren't trying to just tell a few people. They were actually planning on sending it out. And in fact, some people think that they did that. Because as the letter circulated around, workers read it, and because they figured it was their moral obligation, their moral duty to do the right thing, they read it to people. They shared it with people. What they didn't realize is the copy was the one that came from our group. There's a typo in the letter that we noticed after we'd posted it. We thought about retracting it, getting a correction of that typo, and then reposting it. But then we realized wherever we see this typo, we're going to know that that's our letter. I don't know if there's better copies going around online, but every copy I've ever seen has been the one shared by X's. It was shared by Kari and Abby, it was shared within our group, and it was shared by many, many people who are in our group and are members of the X community. The typo in our letter was just a punctuation mark. It didn't change the letter at all. So the letter that went around was still the letter. It was still the right letter. It was still the letter by the overseer. The words were all the same. But that little format error helped us realize that the only information that was being spread from the X community, period. Like I mentioned, I've never seen a copy of this letter that wasn't our letter. What happened next is what we knew would happen. People who had accusations that were similar, people who'd been abused within the church, started coming forward. They started coming forward to us. They started coming forward to different organizations. They started coming forward to law enforcement because they realized that they weren't the only ones. Information within the 2x2s had been suppressed and stamped out for so long that many, many people, maybe hundreds of people, thought they were the only ones who'd had bad experiences because everyone around them had suppressed all information. For their entire lives, they'd never heard good information. There hadn't been good, honest information being shared. And a lot of people who'd lived with guilt from their victimhood because they thought they were the only ones or they thought they'd done something wrong never knew that it was a problem. The CSA issue continues in the 2x2s, and many legal authorities have gotten involved, and hopefully justice prevails and all this stuff. And I won't comment any more on it for now because that's out of my expertise. But what I can say is workers have always worried about information being shared, and now we can see why. Because people, when they get information, can compare notes. And that doesn't always work out for secretive organizations. Avoiding sharing information always benefits people who want power, who are in power, who don't like accountability, and don't want any authority over them. In the case of the 2x2s, the workers have unmitigated power over everyone. They suppress all information that would tell them that that's wrong, or that would lead to any sort of accountability. This one letter that was shared, just one letter, led to a massive change and a huge exodus of people leaving the 2x2s. I guess I can see what they were worried about. Of all the strange gatekeeping and info control that goes on in the 2x2s, the strangest, in my opinion, is how they treat their Bible and hymn book. Those are the only two books they use. They don't have any other writings, of course. So they use one Bible, the King James Version, mostly, and then they have their own hymn book. Their hymn book has some history, and a lot of people know it. Other people have done a good job of writing about it, but I'll say a little bit about it because it's kind of interesting. I find it interesting that many of the tunes and some of the words come from other denominations. We're the one true way, but our hymns come from a lot of other places. But some of those have been altered quite a bit. The words have been changed to match the unwritten but somehow known doctrine of the 2x2s. Hymns over time have been changed. There's been a couple different iterations, and I don't know a lot about the iterations. The hymn book they currently use is one that they've used for most of my life. I think it changed when I was young. And also I've heard that they're working on another one, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But the hymn book that they've used most of my life has some hymns that have changed from previous iterations to remove mentions of grace, remove suggestions of the Trinity, things like that. They really want to be special, so they have to kind of tweak hymns that other people really like to be a little more like what they think they should sound like, and they should match their view. And again, they don't write their doctrine down anywhere, so it's not exactly clear what they're going for. I knew someone one time who wrote a hymn just because this person was very pious and was just feeling the Spirit and wanted to write something. And someone found out about it and said, hey, can we put this hymn into a new hymn book? I don't know if it was a new replacement hymn book or an addendum, like a leaflet or something, or an addition to the current hymn book, but it was being worked on about the time that we actually left. But around that time, I was privy to some conversations about this hymn being put into the hymn book. And it was interesting to watch the back and forth between the person who wrote it and the worker, because the worker that was the contact for this wanted a lot of changes. The person who wrote it from their heart and really meant it, really felt strongly about it at the time they wrote it. And it was just interesting to watch the workers manipulate the words a little bit to change the tone just slightly. I don't actually remember any of the specifics. I just remember thinking, that's interesting. It sounded really good to start with, but it has to sound a little bit different, and I don't know why. I don't know. Again, there's no doctrine written down anywhere. So there's nothing to reference exactly. There's no frame of reference to draw from to write these hymns. And yet they really wanted to use the hymn. The person who wrote that hymn that I'm referring to is no longer professing, so who knows if they're going to actually use it. I think it'd be funny if they did, but I don't think the hymn author really wants it out there anymore. I won't say much more about the hymn book because people have talked about it quite a bit, but I do want to talk about the Bible. The Bible they use primarily is the King James Version. I've heard many, many, many workers say that it's the best version of the Bible. I don't know why they use it. And I think I have two theories, actually. One of them is going to sound like a joke, and I actually don't mean it as a joke. I'm dead serious about it. I'll say that one second. The first one, I think the reason The first reason I think they still use the King James Version of the Bible is because it's just that they've always done it. They like to talk about how the way is unchanging and, God never changes. Jesus' way never changes. And by the way, they mean themselves, even though they do change. That doesn't matter. They just like to say that they don't. And so I think the idea of using a Bible that sounds old and has been around for a really long time and predates a lot of the Bibles that are popular nowadays and are frankly more accurate, I think it sounds attractive to them to have the old one. I don't know if it's the one William Irvine used or what, but if it's the one he used, maybe that's one thing they haven't changed. The second reason I think they like it is just because it sounds cool. And I know that sounds like a joke. It sounds like I'm making fun of them, and I'm not. I think they actually think that the these and thous and thines and hitherto all sounds awesome. It sounds serious. It sounds respectful in a way that you don't show respect anywhere else in the world. If you go to a meeting, you'll realize that a lot of the people in meeting talk that way too, only in their testimony and prayer, never outside of that. You hear a lot in meetings about how you should dress properly in meeting and present yourself soberly and things like that because you're coming before the king, right? You're when you go to meeting, you're sitting before God because that's where God is at meeting, I guess. And somehow inherent in that is talking differently too. 2x2s have adopted King James language when they speak their testimonies and when they pray. And I think they think it's respectful or something. I think it sounds cool. I think it sounds cool, and I think it sounds respectful to them. Now, if anybody knows much about this language, you'll find out that they use a lot of the words incorrectly. But that's okay. It sounds awesome. It sounds respectful, and it sounds special. They are the one true only way, after all. So talking like no one else on the planet talks makes sense to them. They know God in a way that nobody else will. So if they talk to God using Old English language, it sounds more respectful, it sounds more interesting to them, it sounds more serious. So I think that's why they use the KJV Bible, honestly. I do think that actually plays into it. That's just my opinion. They would tell you that it's the most accurate and King James had this mission from God to write the Bible or whatever. I don't know. I think, like I say, I don't think anybody anywhere thinks the King James Bible is the most accurate. Definitely not anymore. But again, a lot of times the important part is just being different than the world. If the world comes up with new Bibles, that's new. We like the old thing. We like the thing that never changes. Again, with that language play, the word play to say nothing ever changes, therefore use an old Bible. Well, that doesn't actually make any sense, but it does to them. And so that grants legitimacy to them. I remember when I was younger, I think it was the NIV came out, and a few people started using it. A few people started reading it as a study Bible. In fact, even a couple workers started talking about using the NIV as a study Bible. And I remember one or two workers in my lifetime in fields that I was in using it to speak from in meetings. People were very bothered by that. They really don't like change, number one. I mean, that's the main thing. They like things to be just like it was yesterday and the day before that, and they don't like to learn new things, fundamentally. But I remember part of the issue being that just the modern words just didn't sound respectful. They didn't sound right. Using modern vernacular, even just not trendy slang or anything, just taking out the thee, thine type of stuff, shall, removing those types of words, just sounded too new. It didn't sound serious. It didn't sound right. And it didn't sound respectful. And so a lot of people were very against using new translations, even to study with. The funny part about that is when people go to other countries, they don't think about that at all. There's no KJV in other languages. That's just not a thing. They just use the other language's Bible. And it's so funny to me how when workers go to other places, they'll talk about studying the Bible in those languages, and it opens up in new ways. It's what a wonderful thing. Listen to this psalm. Listen how it sounds when you translate Spanish to English, for example. Somehow using a completely different language is fine, but using language that we understand today in English is not. I don't understand that discontinuity at all. But it is one way that they really, really control information. They really control how people intake even the spiritual information they have. They don't like study Bibles. They don't like study materials of any kind, any sort of additional materials. And I'm not talking other Bibles. I'm just talking study guides and notes and things like that. None of that. They do not like that. Workers will tell you not to do that. Friends will not do that. What they will do, though, is after a convention, people will get together and read over their gems. They like to call them gems. It's the notes that they took at convention. So, in summary, they have a hymn book that passes for their doctrine on some level, even though it's not really written down and nobody really understands exactly what it is, or at least can't articulate it very well. And then they have the KJV Bible. That's it. That's all you're allowed to study from. No study guides, no scholarly work, no other translations of the Bible. Although you can, but they don't like it. And that's it. That's all. After that, all you have left is worker notes. You can read the Bible, you can read your hymn book, and then you just listen to what the workers say and write it down and treat it like scripture. One thing I've loved doing since leaving meetings is learning about the Bible itself and reading other versions. I really enjoyed listening to a lot of podcasts about Bible scholarship and how the Bibles came to be, each one of them, and where they fit into different people's beliefs and stuff. I don't know where I'll end up in the next few years. Right now, I don't go to any church, but I like having the freedom to just read the Bible now. I don't feel stuck with the King James Version anymore. If I didn't understand something in the King James Version, it just meant I didn't have the Spirit leading me or something, or a worker hadn't told me yet. Now I can just find a reference or a study guide or just go learn from a Bible scholar. I love stuff like that. But that isn't conducive to being a 2x2. I couldn't do that in the 2x2s. When you're a 2x2, you have a little bit of doctrine in a hymn book, and then you skip around verse to verse in the Bible. I think I mentioned before, it's like a rock skipping across water. That's how one ex-worker explained it to me. And that's it. That's how you interact with the Bible. Because at the end of the day, what's really important is the workers and maintaining the ministry itself and listening to the ministry and listening to the workers tell you what to do and have their own interpretation of the Bible. I like that I don't have to do that anymore. I forgot to mention something about the Bible. I'm going to mention this now. When I left, one of the first things I did was went and looked up a Bible story to see how accurate the workers' version of it was. I suspect the workers don't actually know that much about the Bible or the history of the Bible. They just have it. They have their copy of it, and that's it. And that's fine. I don't blame them for that. But when I was younger, I remember there were a few older brother workers, of course, who everyone thought were Bible scholars. And they would have these somewhat esoteric interpretations of the Bible. And they would have stories within a story, or, hey, what the author really meant right here was ... or here's the context for this story, something like that. They would talk like that, and you'd listen extra closely because you never thought of it before yourself. So it was interesting. It was something different. It turns out probably most of it was made up. The one I had to look up the second I left meetings, well, I started to look for it, and I found it fairly recently, within the last year or so. It's where Jesus said something about rich people getting into the kingdom of heaven. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. It's really popular in the religious world and among the 2x2s to say that that's about a camel going through a gate in Jerusalem or somewhere, through a wall, through a gate in the wall. And I've noticed that workers often tell this story this way. They say that, well, for the camel to do what it needs to do to get through that gate, this gate that they've called the eye of the needle, the camel has to go onto its knees. It has to get down on its knees and crawl through. And isn't that like us? If we have a lot of money, that's fine, actually, even though the Bible says it's not. Even though the Bible says rich equals bad in this case. It's actually fine. We just have to do it on our knees. We have to be on our knees. We have to be humble. We have to pray a lot. That's not true at all. That's their version of that is not true. I don't know where that came from, but there's a few places in the religious world that use it. Kind of Protestant Christendom has versions of stories like this from the Bible where they've just completely changed the meaning to just mean something else and just sound cool and esoteric and interesting. And since leaving meetings, I've actually looked into some of these things, especially that one, especially because I wanted to figure out if that one was true. I wanted to know, eye of the needle is not capitalized in the Bible. I always thought that story sounded strange. I didn't think if it was going to refer to a gate that they would probably capitalize it and name the gate. So I had to look that one up. And of course, the Bible scholars agree across the board that's not true. And the reason the Bible scholars comment on it is because a lot of other religions, a lot of other Protestant denominations tell similar stories. I don't know where that got started, but it is really funny to note that a lot of workers get their stories from other groups. Even the anecdotes they tell. I won't get into this too much, but a lot of the emotionally manipulative stories they tell actually come from other places. In the 2x2 support group I run, that some people have been talking about how some of the stories they heard growing up, they can now find online, and they predate when they heard them. They think that the workers probably just went online and found these stories. I don't think that happens a lot, but I think it does happen sometimes. I think they just can't think of anything to talk about, so they go Google some emotional story, probably about somebody dying in a car crash or a camel on its knees, and they tell these stories as if they're real, and they're not. And it's weird because it's like, when I was younger, I used to look up to these workers as Bible scholars, as people who really knew what they were talking about. They really just lived in the Word of God. They spent time in it. They researched. I think they were just making stuff up now, and I think that's a bummer. But once again, it was a way of adding credibility to those workers. The dichotomy here, of course, is they were scholars that told you interesting stories about the Bible while discouraging you from going and looking into any of it. And it wasn't until I left that I realized that the stories were nonsense. That all kind of makes sense. Now, if a professing person hears this, or if somebody takes this to a worker or something, if they take this story about the camel to a worker, the worker will do a kind of sad face and get real somber and say, we need to be careful who we listen to. Be careful where you get your information. Make sure you go pray about this. And most importantly, listen to the workers. If you weren't raised in this, the obvious question would probably be, why in the world, why didn't you just look for info? If you're in it, wouldn't you be curious about the origins? Wouldn't you want to know who started this group? It's really difficult to describe to people that when you're raised in a group like this, and you're told from day one that the workers have all the answers, the way you're in goes back to Jesus, you need to trust the people telling you that, and anyone looking for more information, and especially anybody who comes up with more information, is actually a bad person, and it's proof of Satan working. That just becomes your second nature. That becomes your thoughts. In the last few podcasts, I've talked about how from day one as a 2x2, your emotions are manipulated, your emotions are turned against you, you're turned against your own thoughts. Any rationale you have is negative because it's your rationale, because it's your thoughts, and man's thoughts are evil continually. Any emotion you feel about it is suppressed because it just needs to be. What needs to happen is the ministry needs to keep going. The work needs to continue. It's God's work after all. You're just a human, and if you say anything, you're getting in the way. So of course you're not going to Google. If you've turned against yourself to the point that you suppress all of your emotions and you don't believe your own thoughts, not Googling is easy. Avoiding reading books, avoiding Googling, avoiding learning anything, and trying not to ask questions comes second nature. It's actually more difficult to do the opposite, but it's freeing. And when people leave, the first thing they do is start reading books, start learning. Start just seeing what there is out there. Some people just want to learn more about science. Some people want to learn about history. Some people want to learn just about being a 2x2. What was the 2x2s? Or other religions. They just want to investigate religions and learn about them. What was interesting to me when I was learning about other religions, as I was deconstructing, I was listening to people deconstruct from other religious backgrounds and realized how frequently similar topics came up, how similar our stories all were. That was really interesting, and it made it easier to leave for me because I knew that the commonalities were important. And learning how to deal with those commonalities, learning how to deal with my emotions and my thoughts, and learning how to learn was really important steps that I needed to take. They're important developmental steps. Learning how to think critically is an important developmental step. It affects how you progress through life. It's part of your development. It's part of growth. It's part of growing. It's part of the process of growing. It's really important. And you can't do it when the most important people in your lives are telling you not to do it. So when you leave, you can. And it's really relieving. I've always loved learning, but I enjoy being able to learn more now, broaden my knowledge, take the protection off of my knowledge, open myself up to everything. Doesn't mean I'm any smarter now, but I like learning. And there's nothing to stop me from doing so. because there's no one trying to consolidate power and hold on to power by keeping information from me. It's a bit of a mental trip to realize people all around you who you've trusted have been protecting you from information because they think it's the right thing to do, who maybe weren't lying necessarily, but were lying by omission. And not just because it was the right thing for you, it was the right thing for them. And it was the right thing for your family and your church and everybody around you. They felt like the right thing to do was to protect everybody from actual information. They thought that it was bringing peace to ignore things that made them sad or made them troubled. Again, back to the peace thing. If you lose your peace, it must be bad. So if you learn something troubling, it's not good. That's a weird thing to think about. Sometimes learning troubling information is important because it can help you make decisions. It's an important step. I'm just glad I don't have to fight those battles anymore. I don't have to worry about information being bad for me on a spiritual level. Honesty is really important to me. It always has been, but now explicitly so. I don't have to equivocate anymore and say that something that seems dishonest, or at least dishonest by omission, is the most honest way. It isn't. Not for me, it's not. I can still be kind. I can still be considerate. I can still respect people's feelings. And I don't even have to bring any of this stuff up to anybody, but I can for myself. I don't have to tell anybody that the right thing to do is ignore anything. I don't have to tell anybody, including my family and my kids, that not learning is the correct answer. Learning is good. So far I've talked about emotional manipulation, suppression of thoughts, and suppression of information. And I'm going to continue on with one more podcast in this series, and a summary of why I grouped them all together next time. Hope you're enjoying this, and I'll see you next time.